I'm glad you're here. I'm glad
Are these all
I'm not the only one who loves hymns enough to be here on a morning like this. I'm going to go over that little history sheet that you've got in front of you. I created it originally for my own benefit because I really needed to be brought up to speed on the history of the Reformation and the background for English hymnody that lies within that history. We'll talk a little bit about how the Psalms were the only English hymns before the Reverend Dr. Isaac Watts came along. I'll read to you just a little bit about Watts's life so that you'll have the background of this extraordinary person who is sometimes called, not quite accurately, the father of English hymnody, so that you'll have a little background before we sing a hymn with the benefit of choir members present. We'll sing one of his wonderful hymns. It will be, I'll give you the number in a minute. I'll ask you a little bit about your personal experience of hymns, what they mean to you, how the poetry touches you or doesn't, how music helps you or doesn't. I assume it does. Then a little bit about Watts's, the style of his hymns, which are responsive to a definition of poetry and sacred poetry furnished by John Milton. Then another one of his hymns, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, and if there's time, a little more about Watts's extraordinary childhood, which included serious illness, smallpox as well, and being rejected by a lover. And we'll see how that goes. But the choir has to be out of here by 1:15, and my wife, who will be playing Jesus Shall Reign Where'er the Sun, has been, I've asked her to please tell me when it's 10 o'clock so that we're out on time. So, that history sheet, if you would, comes, a lot of it, from an extraordinary book by Albert Edward Bailey, 600-page book entitled The Gospel in Hymns, published in 1950 on the basis of research he did in 10 other hymnals at the British Museum in London, in the Harvard Archives, at Union Theological Seminary in New York, and elsewhere. An extraordinary book. So that's where a lot of the substance that's here comes from, though I've had to abbreviate it to try and get it on one page. The front page is the 1500s, which includes, of course, the separation of the Church in England from the papacy and the Church in Rome. Just to give you a framework to go on. Some dates to look at. Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn, 1537. 1538, Henry, the head of the English Church. Roman Catholic dogma and discipline are retained under Henry. Henry closed the monasteries. Latin hymns, like "Oh Love, How Deep, How Broad, How High," did you notice? 15th century hymn, translated into the Latin in the 1800s, when some of the Latin hymnody, which Henry threw out in the Reformation, was brought back in. Archbishop Cranmer's first Book of Common Prayer, Later, you will see he's burned at the stake, along with Ridley and Latimer. The Reformation is ugly. Please look at the sentence on the reverse side of the page. Remarkable sentence, I thought, by Albert Bailey. Quote, second quote from the bottom. It seems incredible that the professed followers of the Prince of Peace should have fought one another in England with ferocious savagery for 150 years. Roman Catholic against Church of England, the dissenters among themselves with the Church of England and so on. Their fury is in part accounted for by the fact that religion was mixed up, as you well know, with politics, greed, and the lust for power. All right. Sin is nothing new. The Psalms, which is what I really want to say, the Psalms became emerged in importance during the 1500s. At first, folks were only allowed to sing psalms in their private devotions. But later, psalters were published, and the psalms became a part of everyday life under Queen Elizabeth, 1558 to 1603. She was excommunicated 1570. The Anglican Church begins with that. The established Church of England, the Anglican Church, same thing. Protestant, by law, becomes the religion of the realm. And in ensuing years, the rise of Puritanism. Those who wanted to distinguish themselves from the Church of England, inspired in part by Calvin and, of course, by Luther. Note, please, if you need to, there are varieties of Puritanism. So many Puritans were part of the founding of this country, of course. There are varieties of Puritanism. The Congregationalists, Presbyterians, Baptists, John Bunyan was a Baptist, Nonconformists and Dissenters, all different strands of Puritanism distinguishing itself from the established church. Other side. So the Psalms begin to get sung regularly in the 1500s. Other side is the 1600s. Mind you, I don't have all this mastered in depth, but I needed to orient myself. Hope you find it useful. King James succeeded Elizabeth. The King James Bible, marvelous article in the National Geographic on the King James Bible, and available to you if you want it. More conflict. Finally, at the end of the 1600s, the Toleration Act. Is it called the Act of Toleration? I don't know. At last, dissenters, those Congregationalists, Presbyterians, and Baptists may worship publicly except Roman Catholics and Unitarians. So the battles continue. All right. So, but the point is, the Psalms rise to prominence. They are the only hymns that were allowed in the Church of England in the 1600s. And along comes Dr. Watts, who breaks the stranglehold of the Psalms on the hymnody of the Church of England. And so, that's more than I was going to say, but some of you know that's the way it goes. I was quite intimidated by doing this. I have overcome it for the moment. I needed some help, so I brought in a prop. a reed organ, very popular in this country, mid to late 1800s, early 1900s, used in lots of churches. There were literally hundreds of thousands of them all over the world. And they're still kicking around. This one was built in 1926. It's of the same type that was used in the Army during the First World War and later. I have another one at home, which is a little larger, which is a Second World War version. And as Brenda knows, I'm having restored another one. And there's currently a tussle over where it will be in the house. I want it in the middle of the living room. Brenda has mentioned another location. And I thought I'd give you all a vote on that.
Non-binding.
Non-binding. This is full of little brass reeds. Unlike strings, they're attached only on one end. Here is one of, I don't know how many are in this. Bob could tell us. Anyway, with that background, would you stand and sing? Wait a minute. No, I didn't tell you about Watts yet. Just give me a little more time. We'll get to choir, I promise. Some wonderful quotes about this remarkable man. He was a little man. I'm quite drawn to him. I think that's what I wanted. I'll tell you more about him later, but this will give you an idea of this wonderful man before you sing his hymn. Albert Bailey. Isaac was precocious. Indeed, I'll tell you more to substantiate that. His father, who for a time ran a successful boarding school, was his early tutor and made hay with his young genius while the sun shone. He began to teach Isaac Latin when the boy was 4 years old. He or someone else taught Isaac Greek when he was 8 or 9, French when he was 11, Hebrew when he was 13. This learning was interrupted by smallpox when he was 9 and culminated when he was 14 in what might have been expected in a non-conforming Calvinistic family. As Isaac put it, quote, fell under considerable conviction of sin. Bailey's comment, poor boy. He ought to have been playing more ball. He made the proper entry next year in his journal, quote, and was taught to trust in Christ, I hope. So modest was this young saint about presuming to know that he had been elected to stand among the saved. We must not omit the next item in this list, for perhaps it is the result of all the others. 1689, he had a great and dangerous illness. Just a couple more sentences, because it's kind of fun. His precocity showed itself in insatiable reading and in versifying in season and out. His conversation was so annoyingly metrical that after various prohibitions against rhyming, his father started to whip him. Whereupon the rhymester cried out through his tears, "Oh, father, do some pity take, and I will no more verses make." There's more about his childhood and his achievements. But quite a man who took the sovereignty of God with deep seriousness and knew the sinfulness of man as well, in his own terms. So would you stand and sing hymn number 300, as if for Dr. Watts himself, who was on another shore in a greater light. I will get back to a little more history on Dr. Watts himself. Want to encourage you to think about what hymns mean to you. My father, the grandson and great-grandson of Lutheran pastors in Germany, though his father was in business and he himself went into business, I think felt some obligation to give me a religious background. So he sent me to the Trinity School in New York City, an Episcopal school, where I sat in the front row, wearing short pants, wondering when my mother would buy me long pants like everyone sees on either side of me. Mr. Dan, a former stockbroker, headmaster of the school, led morning prayer. Upperclassmen read the readings. And I must have been taken by the whole experience. There was a pipe organ in the chapel. And all those collects, which mean so much to so many of us. O God, who hast safely brought us to the beginning of this day. That all our doings may be ordered by thy governance. O God, who has taught us that in returning and rest we shall be saved, in quietness and confidence shall be our strength. I mean, I got those in me, some. And we sang hymns. I'd never heard the word holy, I don't think, at home, but it was sung. We regularly sang, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, Blessed Trinity. I think I thought it was a hymn about the school. But those wonderful, early in the morning, our song shall rise to thee. Only thou art holy. There is none beside thee. God in three persons. Though the darkness hide thee, though the sinful human eye thy glory may not see. Things like that. Rise up, O men of God, rise up, ye saints of God, we now rightly say. Have done with lesser things, like getting stuff and looking good, the way I interpret it. I didn't interpret it that way then. Rise up, ye saints of God. Have done with lesser things. Give heart and soul and mind and strength to to serve the King of Kings. You get that. And then got put in a boy choir in Englewood, New Jersey, under an organist. His name is John Harms, an extraordinary musician and very firm with us. Must have had some Calvinist backgrounds. 5 guys from that boy choir went to theological school in my generation alone, and it was only a choir of maybe 25. So, your early experiences with hymns, and are there, what hymns sort of come forward as I'm jabbering away up here? What hymns did you love? What verses might have stood out for you? Anybody?
All things bright and beautiful.
Thank you. Yes.
I remember that one.
Just the kind of hymn my wife wishes I loved more. Others. All things. That's a John Milton, is it not? Is that a John Milton hymn? I'm not sure. Other hymns? Yes, Anne.
Although I don't know if this is Episcopalian. Come ye faithful, raise the strain.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Come ye faithful, raise. God hath brought his Israel.
Out of sin to gladness.
Thank you. Yes. Others? Yes.
Fairest Lord Jesus.
Fairest Lord Jesus. Fair are the mountains, fairer still the woodlands, and all the twinkling starry host. Is that it?
Robed in the green gardens.
Jesus, fairer still. Yes. I'm sorry.
No, I was just finishing the woodlands, robed in the green gardens.
Robed in the. Thank you. Thank
We
you.
didn't get to the stars.
It's nice how this stuff comes back to us, becomes part of us. I had an organist in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, who said, "She who sings, prays twice." Yeah. Other hymns.
Where does Faith of Our Fathers fall? Is that one of ours, or is that one of the Protestants? Other Protestants.
Can I look it up and tell you next week? Yeah, but there's interesting history behind that. Yes.
Well, one that I found interesting, one that I always loved, I grew up in the, congregational church where we sang Christ the Lord is risen today. And it wasn't until I became an Episcopalian that realized that we have different words. Ours is Jesus Christ is risen today.
Yeah.
And then a whole different set of words.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and often at the bottom of the hymn page you'll see who wrote the hymn.
Wesley was the one who wrote the congregational version.
Yeah. I went, by the way, to, just why I missed, wherever Ann is, tell her I missed last week, but I was in the Harvard Chapel down in Cambridge. The opening hymn was a Watts hymn. The closing hymn was a Wesley hymn. I was scared to death of this presentation. I felt somehow encouraged by that nice coincidence. All right. Any other lines from hymns?
This is from our childhood?
From
Whenever.
whenever.
Well, it isn't Episcopalian, it's Luther, but it's though this world with devil still. That's not the beginning, but it's that.
Although this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God has willed his truth to triumph through us. The prince of darkness grim, we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure, for lo, his doom is sure. One little word shall fall. Thank you.
Mighty fortress is our God.
Yeah, that's great.
Yes. And somebody here could provide the German, I'm sure, for that, but I cannot.
How about Amazing Grace?
Thank you. The author?
John Newton.
John Newton. We'll talk about him next week. Extraordinary. Very much influenced by the Wesleys, by the way. And a key figure in the abolition of the slave trade in England.
The Eternal Father. The
Eternal
Lady
Father.
Hymns.
Strong to say. Sounds especially good on a military mission organ.
Saints of God, I
loved as a child. I even remembered the page. I memorized it.
Yeah. I sing a song of the saints of God. For the saints of God are just folk like me, and I mean to be one. Yeah.
Spacious firmament.
The spacious firmament on high.
And in our church in New Jersey, there was a man whose wife had gotten a needlepoint belt that had the number.
Which was 309.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. A couple of things about music. I keep harking back to mentors and friends of mine. Marshall Rice, the rector of one of the largest churches in the Diocese of Newark, used to say in clergy meetings, at least, the Nicene Creed should never be said, he said. It should only be sung. Because only music can lift it into the realm that it needs to be. And William Norman Pittenger, professor of theology at General Theological Seminary, I could tell a lot of stories about him. Wonderful stories. Was a gay man, interestingly. Wrote a book called Time for Consent to Gayness. He wrote it in 1974. Anyway, Norman, among the other wonderful things he used to say, was there's a difference between verse and poetry. When you hear verse, he said, you say to yourself, my, what a lovely way of saying something that I always knew. When you hear poetry, he says, you say, I never saw it that way before. And even though we hear it again and again, a line like, his sovereign power, without our aid, made us of clay and formed us human. When we think, David Brooks says, we're in a wonderful column back in November, we are so taken with our own wonderfulness, he said, that we don't see clearly the dark side. Without our aid. I just love the obviousness and yet the depth of that. Okay. Back to Watts. I love this book. I've ordered a copy for Bob, which may wind up in the library. I didn't get the first edition, but it's available. Isaac Watts believed that John Milton was right about poetry. It should be sensuous, that is appealing. I look at these two English teachers over here. That's one of the reasons why it was so
I figured
hard.
when you said sensuous, you meant
No, I didn't. I meant to break earlier. John Milton said, poetry should be sensuous, it should appeal to the senses, it should have pictures and images in it, as indeed in the last hymn that we'll sing this morning, and Jesus shall reign. His name, like sweet perfume, shall rise with every morning sacrifice. Whether you, well, won't go into that. Let's see. Should be sensuous. It should be passionate. It should have some fire in it somewhere. And first, he said, it should be simple. Simple. Accessible to the common person. Isaac Watts spent most of his later years when he was ill in the home of a Puritan aristocrat. But his passion was to make hymns simple enough so that they would be accessible to everybody. even if they couldn't read English, and they certainly couldn't read Latin. And the simplicity of his hymns really sort of dominating the dissenting churches. All right. Now, 337, against the background of sensuous, passionate, and simple. Would you sing 337? These are all from the 40 hymnal, but the typography in the 40 hymnal is really wonderful. And I didn't have to break the binder to make copies. So, you want to stand it and sing it together, and I'll ask you, I don't know what I'll ask you. Description of what poetry should be sort of shed some light on that for me. Any lines or words that stand out for you? Any one line that hits you harder than others?
I like the last two lines, the final verse.
Thank you.
That's
Yes.
not one, that's two. Sorry.
You must have loved them too, because they made, I think those were the last verses, though a lot of Watts's hymns have been edited, many of them for their sort of frightening, sometimes punitive imagery are no longer sung. He wrote 700 of them. That's nothing compared to what the Wesleys wrote, as we'll hear next week. Any other lines that stand out for you?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, in verse 3, I love that sorrow and love flow mingled down.
I think Bailey mentions those two, that line too. Yes. Any others? Yes. Mary.
Just, the wondrous cross, which makes it sound wonderful, and then the neck juxtaposed to the young Prince of Glory died. And the reminder of how young he was.
Thank you.
That just caught me this time. I don't know.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. And Mary Lee puts her finger on something else. Watts used literary fashions of his time, parallelism, I'm not sure I can illustrate it off the top of my head from this, but I can from other hymns. Parallelism in the imagery, or I'm sorry, in the language. So he knew how to use techniques. I read, say about Robert Frost, just this past week, so trying to feel my way into the subject. And Robert Frost spoke to an audience about the techniques that are used in poetry. Rhyme, meter, all kinds of other things. And a woman in the audience said, "Mr. Frost, surely when you're writing a poem, you don't think of all those techniques while you're writing it." And he said, "Madam, I revel in them." Okay.
Al, the line that
Yes, thank
strikes me
you.
so strongly is in the middle of the first verse. My richest gain I count but lost. And I noticed that, first of all, it encompasses an enormous thought. And secondly, the use of the archaic language makes it possible to compress the thought as he has done here. I count but lost. That's not if you think about it, composing that sentiment in contemporary English, it would be twice as long.
Thank you. Yeah. Right. Prose takes so much. Any other lines or words?
Well, the verbs are really interesting.
Yes.
You pour contempt for all my cry. You could thorns compose so rich a crown.
There's the
love demands my soul. I mean, there's really striking words.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Good.
And then
I had another thought. Yeah, Whitney?
And even contrasted words in the fourth stanza with a whole realm of nature mind, that word offering far too small.
Yes. Yeah. What? A technique and a gift at the same time. Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about poetry last week, as I was alternately excited and depressed about having this to present. I thought of how you hear or read in the newspaper that the swells were 15 feet high and 11 seconds apart, in the nautical report. So that's prose. Robert Frost. The shattered water made a misty din. Great waves looked over others coming in and thought of doing something to the shore that water never did to land before. I was going to ask, how's that different? I'm going to talk for him. I'd like to. Yeah, I've got a minute. Have I got a minute?
I don't know.
Yeah, I've got to quit at 5 minutes. We'll pick up on some of this stuff next week and anything else you want to. Imagine a little man 5 feet high, large head made bigger with a huge wig, a hooked nose, small piercing eyes, a frail and sickly body. The whole combination looking more like an embryo than a fully developed organism. That was the illustrious Reverend Dr. Isaac Watts, 1674 to 1748. Dissenter, Congregationalist. A beautiful and accomplished young lady, once upon a time, fell in love with him through his poetry, having never seen him. When the two met, her disillusionment was instantaneous, while he fell deeply in love with her. He shortly asked her to marry him, whereupon she declined him in her most gracious manner and added with no doubt the best of intentions, "Mr. Watts, I only wish I could say that I admire the casket as much as I admire the jewel." Pretty plain talk. But young Watts took it sweetly, and the two remained good friends for more than 30 years. Watts never married. Perhaps the poor health that clung to him all his days was prenatal in its origin. While his mother was carrying him, his father was jailed for without authorization playing the deacon at the Independence Meeting House. Shortly after Isaac was born, the father was again arrested and put into St. Michael's Prison in Southampton. Tradition says, I just love this, that his mother used to sit on a stone mounting block opposite the jail and nurse her baby while conversing with her husband beyond the bars. The father was jailed a third time in 1683, finally compelled to leave town in accordance with the conventicle and 5 Mile Acts mentioned on page 24. So Isaac Sr. hid himself for 2 years in London, where he plied the business of clothier and ultimately became well-to-do. All right, and very quickly, I have to tell you this. To give you a sense of the extraordinary depth of the man. Talk about getting science and religion together. Was offered a place at Oxford University, turned it down because he would have had to become an Anglican member of the established church, and he didn't want to speak. Became pastor of Independent Chapel in London, preached 22 years, lived with well-to-do parishioners. Fortunately, they could take care of him because he was quite ill, could only preach every so often. Wrote a book on logic used at universities like Oxford and Cambridge. 3 volumes of sermons, 29 treatises on theology. There's a monument to him in Westminster Abbey, as well as elsewhere. Was the most famous religious poet of his day. And he wrote a book for children, Divine and Moral Songs. Not published until 1720, a classic for 100 years. Average sales of 80,000. Now here's something to reflect on. Here's how one of the poems in that little book of moral songs went. Let dogs delight to bark and bite, for God hath made them so. But children, you should never let such angry passions rise. Your little hands were never made to tear each other's eyes. How doth the busy little bee improve each shining hour? In works of labor or of skill, I would be busy too. For Satan finds some mischief still for idle hands to do. Anyway, all right, that's enough. 542. Hymn 542. A reworking of a song. Remember, it was hard to get away from the tradition of using songs in church. When I survey, it's a different case, but do you have?
Yeah,
Anybody got 542? Okay, want to stand again? Run 3 minutes over if you can pick it. Rhonda said, sing loud, please. Jesus shall reign wherever the sun doth his successive journeys run. His kingdom stretch from shore to shore, till the God rest your soul, Isaac. Two books I'll vote from next week, as I promised you. Marcus Borg and Desmond Tutu in a book called God is Not a Christian and Other Provocations.